make it more fun and talk like you're talking to a friend. And it seemed to resonate with people. And honestly, Troy, like I just don't have it in me to fake it for years and years. I think like consistency is the eighth wonder of the world. And in order to be consistent, you just have to be yourself.
Customers know the holidays run on Dunkin'.
Go back to Starbucks.
Welcome to the HRIS Careers Podcast with your host, Troy Wallace, a podcast for human resources information systems professionals to help you elevate your HRIS career. We always say no one gets into HRIS on purpose, but it sure is interesting to find out how they did. We interview your HRIS peers to find out how they got tricked into the industry and what lessons and tools they use to progress their careers along the way. We discuss industry trends, AI, and even talk candidly about all the most popular HRIS platforms. Just think of it as the closest bar just outside the entrance of your favorite HR technology conference. Now you get it. Welcome in. Welcome to the HRIS Careers Podcast, recording live as usual from the beautiful studios in downtown Omaha, Nebraska. Spring has sprung, and Omaha is home to the College World Series in June. What I didn't know is in May we must host the Big Ten Conference Baseball Championship, and I just spent 20 minutes in line behind the entire Indiana Hoosier baseball team to get my afternoon Diet Coke. I digress. Let's get to the important things. Our guest today is CJ Gustafson. He has been a chief financial officer and orchestrated a successful exit and sale of a software as a service company. He is the author of the Mostly Metrics newsletter that caters to chief financial officers and those in finance positions. He also is the host of the Run the Numbers podcast. Now, here are three very relatable things we're going to talk about on the podcast today. So number one, he shares with us his favorite HRIS systems as a chief financial officer. We also talk about, and he wrote a great article that I'll link in the show notes, about the HR metrics that your CFO wants to know about. And number three, and maybe most importantly to all of us, 2 or 3 tips you wouldn't expect about getting your CFO to fund your next HRIS software project. CJ hails originally from the Boston area and has his undergraduate finance degree from Boston College. Producer, let's cue the Boston College fight song. As you may have heard in the cold open, we do have a little fun with some Boston humor with that SNL Dunkin' Donuts clip, and we definitely make quite a few Boston references during the podcast. Now, I heard CJ originally on a podcast called Niche Pursuits, just talking about his newsletter, which I think has reached 65,000 subscribers. So I reached out, and he got right back to me and said yes. Now, this only happens because of you, the listeners. We really appreciate it. As we grow, we're able to get these great guests. Thank you to everyone who is listening today. All right, to tie this back to my HRIS career, so I realized that CJ graduated from Boston College, and it was the same year as the son of a woman who gave me my first HRIS opportunity. So shout out to Tammy Gabrielson. And now it did make me feel a little bit old because he was only 8 or 9 years old when he'd bop around the office back in the late 90s, and now these guys are in their 30s. All right, so let's talk a little bit more about CJ's newsletter. So again, it's called Mostly Metrics. Again, it caters primarily to CFOs, but there's all kinds of relatable things for those of us in HRIS. Just understanding basic finance metrics. He makes things really approachable. He also has a podcast called Run the Numbers, where he has some amazing CFOs, just really impressive. And honestly, it's just a really good model for what I would like HRIS careers to be. He's helping those in financial positions or CFO positions. Same way here, we want to improve the careers of those in HRIS, have some fun, build a sense of community. I would highly recommend going out and subscribing to his newsletter. He does have a paid version, but I believe if you sign up for the free one, it comes out a couple times a week, and there's just really great, high-level, very digestible information on learning the finance game. All right, so last thing, we have some fun, and I post some behind-the-scenes pre-interview footage after the outro music, so stay tuned and listen to that. We talk all things from the roof nearly caving in my home office, to how he monetizes his newsletter, and we end on a little bit more Boston humor. Without further ado, please enjoy this wide-ranging conversation with CJ Gustafson of Mostly Metrics. CJ Gustafson, welcome to the HRIS Careers podcast. We appreciate you being here. We'll find guests in all the most unusual places, and I love a podcast called Niche Pursuits, so we'll put it in the show notes. And you talk all things CFO. Like I refer to you to our community as the CFO whisperer, which means you know the chief financial officer role. You have been a chief financial officer. You have a very successful 60,000 plus newsletter called Mostly Metrics. It looks like you went to school for finance, but can you just give the high level view of how you got to this point of being a CFO for software as a service companies and then building this newsletter?
The benefit is you get to write your story looking backwards. So I didn't plan for it to happen this way, but I'm loving it so far. And I did finance at Boston College undergrad because I thought it was the broadest path I could take with the most wiggle room for me to mess up figuring out what I wanted to do along the way. And I always really liked writing, but I didn't major in marketing or I guess, I don't know, learn to be a screenwriter or something like that. But I always kept that in the back of my head. Like, hey, I want to write about stuff someday. And at the time, I was trying to start various blogs online. I wrote for the school newspaper. So it was always like a skill that I enjoyed and honed in on, but I didn't really know that you could make a career out of it. And so I went down the finance path. I did consulting, which you naturally do if you have no idea what you want to do, but you want to learn about different business models. Then I got a chance to go into private equity for a while, which was a ton of work, and I probably wasn't that great at it, but I got to learn a lot about how companies monetized. And then from there, I got to work for portfolio companies of private equity and venture capital firms. And that's kind of where I found my product market fit originally. I found I was better on that side of the table. And I helped scale 3 different startups, the most recent of which where I was the chief financial officer.
So I want to get this out right away. I got introduced to you through a different podcast, kind of more in the niche newsletter business. I've been listening to it for years because you will find out, maybe we'll get on that. I'm a recovering day trader.
Got it.
And also a recovering website business owner.
Yeah.
That's probably why I got onto the Niche Pursuits podcast. You have what I call an unusual tactic to grow your email list. So I think you're over 60,000 people. And as I understand, your dog gets an ice cream every time you hit a milestone?
Yeah, so mostly metrics.com, 65,000 readers today. A lot of them are CFOs. Everybody who goes there, I think, though, is just trying to get better at their job and trying to improve their company performance, because I try to explain metrics in a way that's approachable, kind of like you're having a beer or coffee with a friend, and being a fan of business at the end of the day, having fun with it. And part of that is my mascot, my dog, who's asleep on the couch next to me, Walter. I said every 1,000 new subscribers, I'd buy him an ice cream, and people love that. So it helped drive engagement, and I kept posting pictures of him eating ice cream. But I mean, he had more than 65 ice creams in the last like 2.5 years since growth started to ramp up. So he may have diabetes now, but the growth is good, and he enjoyed the ice cream.
Hey, sometimes people have to sacrifice, right?
Yeah, we all make small sacrifices.
And I bet you he has really enjoyed that trip to diabetes, if getting all that ice cream. Well, I've got my dog Sally, and I think she wants to get in on that deal. So I have to think of some way to bring her into the fold. So if you go over to YouTube, I will show a quick picture of Walter, and we'll also show one of Sally, our dog. And I may come up with some sort of idea there. So I heard the podcast, and as HRIS professionals, the CFO is one of our customers.
Oh, yeah.
And I think to the extent that you can anticipate and understand what's the data information that they're looking for, the bigger advantage. I just think it's, as an HR person, and we don't get a lot of credit for bringing business value. If you can get the chief financial officer, CFO on your side, that's huge. And I feel like I've done a pretty good job educating myself. but there are so many little things, and I've probably gone through 12 of your episodes, things I just hadn't thought about in a while, things that I thought were interesting. And then I'm going to definitely put this in the show notes. You talk about your top HR metrics. Let's get into that. You're a CFO. What are the types of things that you're looking for on the HR side? And obviously, as professionals, typically reporting comes under us that we can help you look at.
Yeah, well, I'd be remiss to say that I think HR and hiring a great chief people officer is probably the most impactful hire you can make for the whole company. Because me as a CFO, I'm looking at the profit and loss statement and I'm saying 70% of my costs, if I'm at a technology company, they walk on two legs. It's both the beauty and the horror of someone who's running a tech business. Even if you're in a manufacturing business, you may have a higher cost of goods sold, the materials going in, but like the people are the asset. And it's like so true at the software companies I've worked at, because like both the beauty and the horror is of your greatest asset being able to walk out the door every night is like, well, I don't have to manage inventory, but these things over here, they go on vacation, they get sick sometimes, they get upset with their boss. And so I look at chief people officers as being my partner in resource allocation to making sure the company can get a return on our greatest asset, which is our people. And so a lot of times I'll get into metrics that, on the surface, you may say, like, why are you tracking this as like, and with the HR team? But like, I think that the recruiting pipeline and the percentage of candidates that get through each stage is one of the most important and critical, because that essentially becomes the velocity of how fast a business can move. If you're growing fast and need to increase talent, and even more so if you were to drill in on the sales side. Because if you think about my revenue in a software business, it's predicated on how many sales reps you have and what their effective capacity to sell is, how many deals they can do. And a lot of times CFOs will make super aggressive plans and they won't have thought, how many butts and seats do I have today? How many new salespeople do I have? And how long is it going to take for me to hire them and then ramp them into that role so they're educated and can actually help here? So that's like one of the biggest things around the hiring velocity and the fill rate and the attrition rate that I'll study with a good chief people officer.
I was thinking through, where did I hear this little fact? And I'm like, oh, it was from one of your episodes that I listened to earlier this morning.
Yeah.
So you have tons and tons of really high-level CFOs. It's like I said, I'm going to gush over it during the podcast. I think everybody should put it on their list of podcasts that they listen to, because it gives you a different perspective that is HR related in some way. You or your guest have talked about the fact that Facebook actually increased earnings and cut headcount.
Yeah.
And that's certainly not a trend we typically see. That the playbook is typically to grow, you got to add headcount. Is that something that you're seeing more often? A trend that's happened with AI?
Their stock went up. That was the crazy part. So usually if you cut headcount, it's signaling that the business isn't doing as well. But they said this is due to AI efficiencies. And honestly, like let's take a hard look. We probably got a bit bloated and over our skis with hiring for positions we didn't need. And so when Facebook did that, I think the market and the street said, okay, this is a serious company. They're really trying to drive towards efficiencies and they're rewarded for that. But usually, like if you see a software company that's say under, call it 10 billion market cap,
right?
That's not as massive as a Facebook. And now they run their revenue streams through mostly advertising revenue. So you have to also think like, how does a business make money and how do people impact that? Maybe it's less so of like a sales rep than like some tech businesses, but usually when you cut headcount, it's an omen of we may have more expenses than the revenue we hope to bring in.
Obviously, there are different components underneath recruitment and hiring. You've got offer acceptance rates and time to fill, time to hire, cost per hire. All of those metrics. But what do you think impacts the bottom line? Do you find that it's really time to hire? Because especially, let's say it's a sales role, that leaving that role empty for X number of days costs you X number of revenue. Is that the type of things that you're looking for?
Yeah, because if you have a quarterly target and you just do back of the envelope math, some of the best math I do, Troy, isn't like in a spreadsheet, just me writing it down like on the back of I don't know, like hotel stationery or back of a napkin. And it's basically just trying to figure out if we can close this many deals at an average price of this, how many reps will it take to do that? Just like simple multiplication. And so that's where like sales capacity comes into play. And now like it's not only about the sales team, like that's the atomic unit I say for revenue,
Right.
but it's also about like managing expectations. If you want to build a new product, but you don't have that specialty in house, maybe it's like a chief product officer that knows AI, then you probably shouldn't say that you're going to have it out next year because it takes a lot of time to build stuff. And while we're on the topic of metrics, something that I do look at a lot is the average cost per person. So fully loaded salary. And this is something that a lot of smart HR people look at. They won't just look at the salary, but they'll look at the benefit load. They'll look at all the other stuff that goes along with just having a person. And usually in the US, it's about a 20% uplift. So if you make $100,000 a year in salary, it's probably $120,000 for the company to employ you. Now that percentage can go either way. Like, and also if you're hiring somebody in like Sweden, it's going to be like 40 or 50%. So that 100 grand is really 140, 150% because of all the state and government taxes that go into it. But I'm always looking at that as a leading indicator of where are we hiring more expensive talent? How is that fluctuating over time? And like, how does that match up with the stage of company we're at? Because early on, people aren't paid as much because maybe you're given equity to work there, but also the company doesn't have a ton of money, so you have to take a bet. And then you hire more experienced people and go through this kind of peak. But then you also, once you have those people on board, you have to hire people under them. So then it may go down on an average basis. So that's something that I'm always looking at on a department level and saying, does this match the narrative of where a company is stage-wise?
Yeah, there's just so many things. So I'll give you for instance. So my first job as an HRIS manager, I'd done functional HR, knew I wanted to get into technology and got an opportunity. And the woman that hired me was the vice president of human resources, but she was previously the controller. So she was very finance minded. And she just asked me for the data. And she said, Troy, find me how many people are currently on our health insurance that are not working the hours to be on our health insurance. And in one fell swoop, now I know it wasn't maybe great for some of the employees, but this was a telemarketing company back in the heyday of telemarketing. So they had 10,000, 12,000 employees. And, she was finding 300 and 500 people. And that's a large number, right? She's paying her salary just in that one find.
Yeah, that's crazy. That's a good example of using the data. Bad day for those people, especially if they had too much ice cream like my dog and needed to see a medical professional. But at the same time, like you do have to, that's like a perfect example of costs going up over time because you just lose sight of how big the org is and the knock-on effects. I think like another thing that happens to orgs as they grow is it's just like harder to communicate messages. So you have like the cost part, but you also have like the speed at which an org can operate. And like as you hire more and more people, you're adding another node to the system, and it just takes longer to get a message out, and you have to over communicate all the time.
Yeah, there's so many things, and again, I'm going to link the this article that is on your website in the show notes. It's probably a 5 to 7 minute read, but it really kind of line items of metrics that CFO thinks is important in human resources. And I'm going to go to one more. So you call it the GOAT of software as a service metrics, and you've spent a lot of time in the software as a service industry, and you call it the average revenue per employee.
Yeah.
Where does that fall in your dashboard? Is that something that maybe a CFO is looking at monthly, every quarter? Do they typically set a threshold where they get nervous about it if it goes above or below a certain point?
Great question. It's something that you probably measure on a quarterly basis, and you want to see it going up over time because it shows what we call leverage in your business model, that you're getting more revenue based on the inputs, the people in your machine that you're putting in. And when a company first starts out, you have to hire people to build the product, then you hire people to sell the product, and then you hopefully increase your sales. And as you hire more people, you want to make sure that your revenue is growing at a faster rate. Because if you think about it, like you don't need 2 CFOs at a company. So once you have one, you should be able to continue to grow the company elsewhere. and not have to hire more of that position. And like I said, you get leverage out of your model. So revenue per employee is my favorite metric because it cuts through all the noise. At the end of the day, you can't hide from it. And it's extremely simple math. It's just your total average recurring revenue, annual recurring revenue at the end of the period divided by the number of employees you have on board. And typically, if you're a company that's going to go public and be publicly traded, you want to be over $400,000, just rule of thumb, per employee. Now, if you're a company that's only doing $5 million in revenue, it may be like maybe $50,000 per employee, especially if you're burning cash. But over time, you want to try to get it to something, closer to $500,000.
All right. So that means with my one-person consulting company, I either have to fire myself or I have to raise my rates.
Yeah.
To get to that before I go public, right?
Yeah.
So this, I'm going through this article, and I love all of these stats that you have. So I want to touch on at least one more, and it could be quick if you've never been in an organization. Have you worked for an organization? I have not, that has professed this unlimited vacation time.
Yes, I've been on both sides of that. It's fascinating. It's what's your take on it?
Well, does it work? I mean, I know their
Depends on what
expectation
you
is
want
that
to work, because I know for a fact people take less vacation when you do unlimited vacation, and it costs.
Well, and that's what I
less.
suspect.
Yeah, it's
right?
true. It's true.
I think everybody gets attracted to it as an idea, and then those people also tend to be the type of people that are maybe high need for achievement, and they just never take it.
Yeah, and the reason why is because it's a liability on the balance sheet. It's something you owe employees if it's not unlimited. So you accrue it over time. So if somebody has 4 weeks worth of vacation per year, a small portion of that is put on the balance sheet saying we owe that person this much money. But if that person quits, you have to pay them out that amount, their rate times the number of days. If you have unlimited, you don't have to do that. So that's the main reason why companies do it.
All right. A couple times that you were on either side of that, did you feel like it worked? It was a good policy to have? I've been in my own consulting for 10, 12 years, but I see that every once in a while, like, if I find the right situation where they're, advertising that, I know that I'd be probably one of those people who would never take the time. But it is just that nice feeling to know, I have a supportive employer who is supporting that I make the decision.
I think it's much more important to have a maternity and paternity program that works best for employees. Like vacation, people will, I think if they really, really need it, they'll take it. But like you want to make sure that you protect the people when they have kids. Like I don't have a hard take on unlimited vacation. Like I just know that if you look at the math, it does benefit the company more so than the employee. And when we actually did it, because I made the transition at one company, the days went down that people were taking, because we still track the days. Even though it was unlimited, it was still logged somewhere.
Right.
And maybe the tracking wasn't as good, but people definitely took less days. Because if you get to the end of the year and it's a use it or lose it scenario, people end up taking off more time. And then there's also like and this is a problem, there is the incentive to not log it, because if you quit, you want to quit with 6 weeks of vacation so you get a fat paycheck. So I've seen it both ways. It's more just a reality check of how you want to run the org.
Yeah, there's so many different ways to slice it. And I would say, the tables have changed a little bit here in the last 18 months or so, where I feel like it's more of a employer market rather than employee market. But, it's still trying to make those distinctions in the market.
Yeah.
Of things that are unique to your company that sets you apart are certainly important. So we're going to move on to some real kind of brass tacks items, and would love to get your take on it. Obviously, you want the data, you want this information. As you went through the finance department, different levels, then to eventually the CFO, did you pick up on any particular, and we can name names because I don't have any sponsors. We can name names. Any particular systems you found that people enjoyed using? It could be small business gusto. maybe bigger companies were using Oracle, SAP, or Workday.
Yeah.
Were there
I
any
was
trends that you found?
I was always impressed by both HiBob and BambooHR. They were easy to use. And why I cared? Because I was always trying to pull correct census data on employees. And that was indicative of just the stages I was at. I've used Workday too. It was a long time ago. It was a much bigger company. That's more of an
Right.
enterprise solution. But I was always impressed by just the usability. For someone who's like not in HR stuff every day, I could pull the reports I wanted and I could toggle different metrics. I always do find it funny though that like some of these HRIS systems, like just the order that they put the data points in, like I'm looking for somebody's salary and I see like their sweatshirt size. It's like, what? Why is that the first thing that's meant? Who designed this? That was the most important thing. So just like a word of caution, or I don't know, a product enhancement for anybody who cares enough to listen to my suggestion.
Yeah, no, I would agree. It's so I used to do a lot more payroll, core HR, and then the world evolved and talent management became a thing. And I've got kind of niched into applicant tracking systems, and everybody builds their career site, right? And the whole goal is to get somebody to apply for a job. And then you can't find where the job listings are. Like you've got to click through like 3 or 4 different pages, like to finally get to a small button at the bottom.
Yeah.
It's just you think some of those things are logical, but alas, they are not. Are there any reporting platforms? I mean, do you find that, yes, you've got HiBob or maybe some other system, but people are using Airtable or Tableau or anything those get kind of more advanced analytics?
Well, the data that I usually look at is in one of 3 categories. It's either the financial data, like a revenue metric or a cash metric. It's
Right.
The sales metrics, like number of deals closed, average deal size, or it's a product metric, like number of downloads, number of conversions on something, number of licenses, and all 3 of those you can pipe into one BI system to look at it. And then you also want the people data that are going into those financial statements. And so I wouldn't say any of those views are like solely HR views in and of itself, but I would look at using like Greenhouse to track, like I said earlier, like the candidate pipeline. And
Okay.
I think like just the time that it takes a manager to get through the interviews shows how dedicated they are to the process, because nothing is more frustrating to a CFO than someone who is running around like their hair is on fire saying they need to hire, and you open up budget for them to go and hire them, and then they run like a crappy hiring process. They're not willing to put the work in themselves to go and interview an adequate number of people or to move candidates through the process in a manner that is like representative of our company's brand. So I would just flag that to any HR leaders who are working with department leaders, like, and they probably empathize with me, because I've had situations too where, they beat up on the hiring manager may beat up on recruiting. Oh, I'm not getting enough candidates, but it's really that they're the one who's not running their end of the bargain.
When I'm in designing these applicant tracking systems, those are kind of the things that they are trying to build into the system, or little gates to see, where is the holdup. And unfortunately, everybody likes to blame everybody else. It's a recruiter's not giving me the right types of candidates. And then on the other side, you got the recruiter saying, well, I'm giving you these people, you're sitting on them, right? You're not interviewing, you're not doing the things that I would think that you would need to do.
Mm-hmm.
So let me know your perspective on this. So a lot of us as HRIS people, our career progresses if we get to implement new and better software for our companies, because it can lead into consulting careers. It can lead into bigger jobs down the road at different companies. There's lots of advantages.
Mm-hmm.
So chief financial officers often hold the purse strings. As a matter of fact, this may predate you getting into finance. I've lived through the dot-com bust, lived through the financial crisis of 2008, and we were going to buy this nice new shiny SAP HRIS. And I was real excited about it, international in scope. And the financial crisis happened, and I was in a business that they did heavy construction equipment rental. Great business, really well run. And the chief people officer comes in and shows me a chart of it just down, 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 says nobody's ever seen anything like this. And poof, it's gone. So I didn't get to have that experience. If we're out there trying to get the buy-in of a chief financial officer, somebody who's holding the purse strings, to go spend money on HR technology, do you have any tips, things that would help us make our case?
Yes. So you want to speak to the holistic benefits for the organization, not just the HR department, right? Because being the HR department, whatever data you're touching impacts somebody else, because it's going to be a person working in that department, so the person managing them, and it's also going to be a cost at the end of the day. The biggest thing you can speak to help build that case is the visibility you gain by doing this. And then you also want to prove when you're pitching it that you've actually gone and done your homework by talking to the other people who will be using it. So don't just make it like, hey, we as an HR department discussed it. Show that you have discussed it with people who it'll impact their daily workflows, right? Because you don't want to buy something that's just good for HR, but like your chief product officer can't log in and see the hierarchy of his or her org. That would stink. And then something I would caution away from doing is just purely saying, well, it's in my budget. That's like the worst thing you can say to a CFO.
Right.
It's like, well, all the other stuff doesn't matter because we wrote down this number at the beginning of the year that I could spend. Like I don't have to basically come up with a reason why it's the best ROI. So that's the advice I'd give.
Well, we always complain in HR that, we're always the last to get money, new technology. I think that is an important thing is, what is the right way to make your case to the C-level, especially the chief financial officer. Mm-hmm. All right. I want to go a little bit deeper about your newsletter.
Sure.
So mostly metrics is the newsletter, and then you have a podcast, Run the Numbers. And like I've already gushed about it, that I think it's a must listen for people in HR to get a little, CFO finance flavor in their life. What sparked the idea? Was it just something you thought you'd write about a little bit and it just kind of grew from there? Was there somebody who gave you the idea to do it because they thought you were a good writer or just had good ideas? How did that come about?
So I was working at a hyper-growth software company at the time, and I was really terrified that I was going to forget everything I was learning because it was coming at me so fast. This was back in 2020, and I realized that in order to get to the next level and get to the C-suite, you're basically paid for the playbook you had, the ways that you would implement a strategy, the ways that you would talk about different metrics and explain their impact on company performance. And so it was my way of writing it down to memorialize what was going on. And now it didn't necessarily start like that. A lot of it was just like talking about wacky business ideas because I just needed to scratch the itch somehow and apply what I was learning. And it took me 2 years to find what I call audience market fit. And that's when people were pulling it out of my hands because it was actually helpful to what they were doing day to day. At the end of the day, it was really just me trying to explain to myself things I was either learning, because I truly think you don't own an idea until you can teach somebody else. You're just renting it until then. And that helped me solidify my understanding of things I was learning and memorialize it in a way that I could come back to it. What I didn't realize is I was basically creating my own resume for whatever may come next. And it actually helped me get my first CFO gig because there was an investor reading it who had a company they were working with and they needed a CFO. And so it just kind of shows that by putting myself out there online, and I wrote and wrote and wrote, nobody listened for the first 2 years. Eventually, I found the tone and the style that was native to me, and it helped write myself into a room that I wouldn't have gotten into before.
I listened to it, and I go back and forth. So, if you listen to the podcast, people know they'll hear little random drops that, it just makes me laugh. Mostly. So, I try and get some personality, but I'm always like, I should kind of hold back a little bit. You've really let your personality come into it.
Oh, yeah.
Has that ever been a problem for you? Are you ever lost readers, or do you feel like it's a net positive for the newsletter?
It's a net positive. And honestly, you have to stand out in some way. Most of the stuff online is pretty boring. And I wanted to create an on-ramp for people to want to participate in the conversation around business. And to do that, you have to make it fun. Nobody wants to hang out with just like a total stiff or a cardboard box for a personality. So my approach was don't make it overly academic, make it more fun, and talk like you're talking to a friend. And it seemed to resonate with people. And honestly, Troy, like I just don't have it in me to fake it for years and years. I think like consistency is the eighth wonder of the world, and in order to be consistent, you just have to be yourself. So it was really the only way to do it for me.
Yeah, and now you said you're over 65,000 strong.
Yeah, and that's what led to the podcast, because I say either die in newsletter or live long enough to see yourself become a podcast. And I was having these amazing conversations with readers, and I said, well, how about I record some of this? And a lot of the readers that I was talking to were CFOs, and that made the Run the Numbers podcast.
And how long has that been going now?
Almost, I think, coming up on 2 years, which is amazing to think. I've done over 150 episodes, a mix of solo episodes of me just riffing on my thoughts of the day, and also interviews with high caliber business leaders. So it's, for the majority, it's CFOs, but it's also anyone who's a business model expert or has something to help like the people who are making the trains run on time within a company, like HR people, better at their jobs.
Right. And so if people go over to mostlymetrics.com, as I understand, there's a free version, and then is there a paid version that's a little more for, I'll call it the advanced?
Yeah, and that's where I do deep dives on different benchmarking reports I've written, as well as ways to upskill. So teaching you something that like you can apply in your next board meeting, of like how you should lay out the deck, things like that. Hyper tactical stuff and templates that you can download.
I know before you got into doing Mostly Metrics, what was your last CFO job?
It was at a vertical software company in the automotive space.
Okay. And as I understand, and again, I've heard you on different podcasts, so I'll steal from them, but that was a situation where there was a successful exit where you sold the company?
Yeah. So I was lucky to drive the car from point A to point B and not mess it up.
That is key. As someone who's got to teach their nearly 15-year-old daughter how to drive, that resonates with me. What was that like? And let's say the last 3 months. So of us in the HRIS, man, we're at some point maybe we're going to go do something entrepreneurial, or maybe we've got an idea for our own HRIS little supplemental software as a service company, and we get to that point where we've got a shot. Maybe we're growing it to 15 or 20 or 30, and we've got somebody sniffing around. What does that last couple of months look like?
To sell a company?
Yes.
It almost killed me, if I'm being honest.
Okay. All right.
It was hard. It was difficult because there's so many information requests. You have to tell the company story so many different times to different parties, and you're working with people with all different incentives in it, whether it be your own investors. Some may want to sell, some may not. The personalities of the other members of the C-suite. Some people are worried about their job, which is rightfully so. Like, we're all people. And then you're also dealing with just the exhilaration of the situation where there is money on the line. And so it was a formative experience. I'm glad it's over, because there's a lot of pressure, and you don't want to put in so much effort and then it falls apart. A lot of deals do fall apart. A ton of deals fall apart. And so it was definitely like a pressure cooker situation, and it was on me to get the numbers right, at least. Like, we built this beautiful company. I didn't want to do anyone a disservice by not putting our best foot forward.
Yeah, I'm sure it'd be exhilarating at one point, but also probably glad it's over.
Huge relief
at a certain point.
Yeah.
And from there, did that launch into the newsletter, which morphed into a newsletter and podcast, or had you started that already?
I'd started that already. So I'd started the newsletter back in late 2020, I believe. And I'd started the podcast a year and a half before that. And so I was doing those in the background to get better at my job, to talk to other CFOs, to network and try to better myself, and also to, like I said, memorialize what I was learning. So it's I was fortunate enough to kind of have, I wasn't just pushing it uphill from the beginning. I already had the car had some momentum. I just had to get in it.
We all hope we can get there at some point. So, number one, I know you're from the Boston area, but you're living in Connecticut now. Are you a Boston sports fan?
Huge Boston sports fan.
Okay, I'm gonna ask one other question, then I'm gonna get to the Boston sports.
All right.
So let's say that somebody, maybe they're in HR or in HRIS, but they really are gravitating more to finance, or they're really interested in that. And, maybe they have an idea of transitioning so much that they could be a CFO someday. What's a piece of advice you could give them in transitioning? You got to go get your MBA. There's a certain book you better read. There's these set of things that you should do if you want to transfer over to a financial role. What advice could you give us?
You do need to have at least an undergraduate degree in most cases to do finance. I don't think you need an MBA. I didn't go and get one. To some people, it is really valuable, especially for building your network. But I did not go back to school for that. What I've learned is it's actually more about the people than the numbers. It's about understanding personalities, about understanding incentives, like I mentioned, and putting people in the right spot to succeed. And it's kind of like, if you think about your CTO, I doubt your CTO is still coding, lines of the product. They're managing the people that do that. It's the same thing being a CFO. I'm going to open the ERP and download the P&L maybe every once in a while, but usually it's somebody else putting the info in, closing the books, and I'm managing the process and making sure I have the best people there. So, people are complicated. That's the hardest part of the job. It's not the numbers.
That's just a recurring theme on the podcast. It just wasn't for the meddling, complicated people.
I know, right?
A lot easier. All right. So we know we need to get you out of here, and we always like to do something called the lightning round. We will ask the questions rapidly. Your responses do not have to be rapid. So let's go with number one. What's been the weirdest or funniest thing a reader has sent you after you've sent out a newsletter, or maybe a comment on a post or a podcast?
I've had some this doesn't happen that often, but every once in a while, someone will get really angry and say something mean about gross margin. So it's weird when you step back and someone's angry about something about a financial metric. It's are you angry at the alphabet? And I'm always taken aback, but then I laugh, and then I think oh, it must mean that I made it in some respect, that if it's big enough that there's somebody out there saying this crazy stuff. But most of the time it's I'm blown away by how gracious and nice people are saying oh, this helped me get a job, or this helped me look better in front of my boss. And those messages are the ones that keep me going.
And they leave Walter out of it, right?
People love to say nice things about Walter.
Good.
Yeah.
Good. That before I bring Sally into the mix, I want to make sure that there's no danger there.
Yeah.
All right, so let's talk Boston sports. So I was a huge Boston Celtics fan back in the day growing up. I was back in the Parrish, Larry Bird, McHale days, so probably pre you being born. But let's say if you had to rank order the major Boston franchises, what is that order? Let's do the Celtics, the Red Sox, and the Bruins.
Well, I'm spoiled. I understand that, especially the generation that I grew up in. Having Tom Brady as a part of your childhood,
the Patriots, yes.
That was huge for me. And I grew up thinking that I was going to make the NBA until I was about 14 years old and realized I couldn't touch the rim.
Yeah, me too.
But I'd say it's probably a toss-up between the Patriots and Celtics in my book in terms of ability to win consistently. Celtics have more banners over time, have been around longer, but the Patriots had 2 dynasty runs in there, 2.5 maybe, and that was incredible to watch. And then Red Sox, to me, I'm not a massive baseball fan, but I feel like that's a huge cultural element of just coming from Boston. You wear the Red Sox hat because you're proud of the city. You may or may not be a huge baseball fan.
All right, so it sounds like we've got a tie at the top with the Celtics and the Patriots, and then we've got the Red Sox and the Bruins coming in fourth.
Mm-hmm.
If you had to choose one franchise and you could never go to another game of the other franchises, which one would you choose?
I love watching Celtics games live. That's fun.
That is the right answer.
Yeah.
That is the right answer. Excellent. All right, let's move on to question number 3.
3.
So what's the most ridiculous thing that you've ever Googled for a mostly metrics post?
Yeah, I did a deep dive on OnlyFans and their business.
Oh
model
my
and
goodness, I
financials.
just saw that in your notes.
Yeah.
Uh,
Well, so they're a UK company, which means they have to file with something called Customs House. So their financials were available online. And so I did a deep dive into their revenue and like the different components of how they monetized.
and you are a My First Million fan, right?
Oh, he did.
To see that in your list. So I think I've got you by 20, 25 years, but our podcast interests are definitely aligned
Yeah.
based on what I saw on
Yeah.
your post. So yeah, I love that. And I remember, I think Sean Purry did like a really big deep dive
Yeah, it was a great listen.
into the OnlyFans business. Absolutely. Okay. Well, I'll make sure you get all that in the show notes. All right. We're going to call this the last question.
4.
All right.
So, Boston loyalty test. If you had to, would you ever switch to Starbucks for a year? If it meant doubling your newsletter subscribers.
It would be really hard, especially with the Ben Affleck, Tom Brady, Matt Damon commercials. I'm pretty loyal, but I think I'd sell out if it meant doubling the subscribers. I'm a junkie for caffeine, so I think I'd do it.
Would you ever buy? This is not was not my original question, but would you ever buy a Dunkin' Donuts franchise?
It depends. I'd have to watch the traffic cycle of cars passing each day and know if they give me a drive-through or not.
That is interesting.
Yeah.
So the only reason I asked that is I've had one person I knew in college and another person I kind of know here in the neighborhood in Omaha. They were selling the rights probably 9 years ago for the Midwestern locations, and one they sold. So I don't know if they failed or not, and one's still going. But I didn't know if that would be a great thing for a Boston night to want to do, or if they're just like, I want to be a customer, I don't want to run the
It
place.
seems pretty saturated, at least where I am now. There's one on almost every corner. I don't know. Which is good for me as a consumer, honestly, so I'm not complaining.
Yes, absolutely. CJ Gustafson, I really appreciate you being on the podcast. I could talk to you forever. There's just so many things. I recommend everybody go and listen to Run the Numbers on all your podcast platforms, or get on his email list at Mostly Metrics. I'm an HRIS person. I've just got a ton of value. So any closing comments for us?
No, thanks, Troy. You're a gracious host, and I appreciate the support. Every lesson and read means the world because I put a lot of work into it. So thanks for having me on.
Yeah, absolutely. And for the rest of the HRIS Careers community, we'll talk to you all later.
Here we go.
What is your time constraint?
I have exactly 58 minutes.
If if you see pieces of my ceiling start falling on me,
Yeah.
just, we had some water damage.
Okay.
My son was taking a shower on Tuesday night. Plumber came out, but it looks like it's secure.
Okay. I'll send help if it collapses.
Do you have kids?
I have 2 kids. I have a 1-year-old and a 3-year-old, 2 daughters.
2 daughters.
Yeah.
See, our first was a daughter, and that has its own experiences that we're hitting now that she's 14.
Yeah, that I think you're in a different emotional era. I'll put it that way than I'm in right
Yeah,
now.
she's going to her first real concert by herself with her friends
Oh,
tonight.
wow, that's a big milestone. I didn't turn on monetization until I hit 11,000, and that felt
Okay.
and there are different ways to do it. I'm sure there's somebody out there who has a newsletter for Ferrari enthusiasts, and there's
Right.
300 people on it, and he makes a ton of money. So there are different ways to skin the cat, but it is a distribution game at scale for them. So it's for them to take time to work and engage with, because it takes the same amount of time for them to set up somebody on
Yes.
the procurement system and everything. That's what I've learned.
Right. Find the
There
right.
is. Then you start to learn the game inside the game, though, that budget comes from a different part of the marketing budget. That's the events budget, which they spend crazy
Right.
amounts on, which will be different than their growth budget or different from their brand budget.
Uh,
Oh, yeah, that
the-
was me. That was me, yeah.
You actually okay, over and above, man. I don't think anybody's ever actually typed into that before. I started reading. It's like, oh man, he actually answered some of these questions. This is great.
I just try to prepare because I know it's
Right.
you're taking time out of your day, so I don't want to show up like I don't know what I'm talking about.
Right. So I love that article about the HR metrics that you did.
Yeah.
So I might touch on some of those. But all right. So I will bring you in just to saying welcome to the HRIS Careers podcast, and off we go.
Cool. Let's do it.
Just in Nebraska, your last name would be pronounced Gustafson.
Yeah, you nailed it.
Okay.
I got to move there.
There you go. Is it Gustafson more German?
Swedish.
Swedish.
That's
So
what I'm
there's
told.
a ton of Swedish and German people landed in Iowa and Nebraska back in the day.
Ah, okay.
Love Dunkin', guy. What are you talking about? Tell them what your favorite, how you like the vanilla nut taps.
What?
The vanilla nut taps.